Hello, strangers. It's Tuesday, and on Tuesday, we tell a story. This one's, well, I guess you'll see. This is story number 54. I'm a guy, and when this happened, I was 16. My mom once asked me to house sit for a coworker of hers. I was in high school, and while the growth spurt had me at only 5'9", it was like I'd lost all of my baby fat to get there. This left me scrawny and non-threatening. Apparently, the coworker lady had been nervous about a man being alone in her house. But upon meeting me, she had changed her mind that I, quote, would ever be a threat, unquote. Gee, thanks, lady. Her house was about 1.5 miles away from our house, so on the Friday I was to begin my duties, I drove my car over. It was a 3-bedroom house at the end of a sparsely populated dead-end road. Not a cul-de-sac, but like a road the developer just gave up on halfway. The inside was decorated in the early 90s style. Where each wall met the ceiling, she had applied floral wallpaper strips. Dusty fake vines and ivy were tucked above cabinets, making the effect 3-dimensional. Her furniture, floor, and accent rugs varied in a color palette of dusty rose pink, light cornflower blue, and orange honey-stained wood. I'd been told the room I was to stay in was a spare at the very end of the hall, sharing one wall with her bedroom and the other with a bathroom. I unpacked my stuff, then took a look around. As I walked up and down the halls and peeked into rooms, I checked for what doors on the house opened to the outside, and thus should be part of what I checked that night. The lady was thorough. There were dowel rods in all of the sliding glass frames, patio doors, and windows. The lady was thorough. There were dowel rods in all of the sliding glass frames, patio doors, and windows. I also found that all of the doors were already locked, including the door between garage and house that most people forget. Sure, it wasn't Fort Knox, but it was pretty secure. The lady called around 8 p.m., asking if I found everything I needed in the refrigerator, how I was settling in, would I mind watering the plants and bringing in the mail, and was the bed comfortable? I said sure to all of it. I mean, it was the first day. I hadn't tried out the bed, but it was a bed. What could be wrong with it, you know? Her voice dropped on the line, conspiratorially. She asked if I'd laid down on any of the other beds in the house. I squeaked back. What? Why would... No. She laughed, giggled, and said that was good, that I was being a good boy. Look, I get that she was grandma old to me, but that comment was received about as well as meeting me and stating aloud how weak I appeared. I just sort of made sounds without opening my mouth, acknowledging her comment and hoping she'd move on and stop saying weird, awkward things. She got off the phone after that. Antsy from that strange call, I checked the other rooms in the house. I'd had a suspicion when she said that thing about lying down on the other beds, and here I confirmed it. The only two beds in the whole house were the spare room and her bedroom. Like I said, weird and awkward. Of course, I stuck to the bed in the spare room, but it took me a while to get to sleep. There was a grandfather clock in the den I'd noticed as I walked through the house. During the day, the sound of it was covered by world noise, cars driving by, birds outside, dogs barking. But that night, I found that it ticked so loudly, it sounded like a knock. We didn't have clocks like that at home. It kept distracting me from the edge of sleep, making me startle awake, sure I needed to answer a door. I must have just finally passed out at some point. Weirdness aside, I stayed the whole weekend. The lady called every night. While the phone call always started out polite, perfunctory, and gave me false hope it'd be normal, there was always some strange comment. Did I find the shower to my liking? Was the temperature in the house okay? And if it wasn't, it was okay by her if I wanted to, quote, go shirtless, unquote, as sometimes she herself did. That last one honestly had me checking the house for hidden cameras. I didn't find any. It wouldn't really have gone with the 90s decor. But when my mom called, offering to bring over some leftover pizza, I just couldn't tell her. It was weirding me out, but this was my mom's friend. And there's commiserating with someone that this is weird. It's a world of difference to go out and accuse someone of something more serious. It just seemed out of pocket to go there right from the jump, because this older lady didn't know how to talk to younger guys, or had an offbeat sense of humor. As we ate, though, I asked my mom, how well did they know each other? My mom's take was that she was nice. She'd shown my mom the ropes at work, but she was quiet and shy for the most part. And that made sense to me. I think I might have agreed with her about the shyness, maybe even had brought up the things she said on the phone as symptoms of social awkwardness. Might have done, if not for the next thing my mom said, that the lady was nothing like her dad, who was the head and owner of the company at which my mom worked. Well, now I really couldn't say anything. Hey, Mom, let's go accuse your boss's daughter of being awkward on the phone. Yeah, sure. No way that's going to blow up in my mom's face. So I didn't say anything to her about the strange calls at night. We ate our pizza, my mom left, and like a sign from God himself, my last night in the house was phone call free. See, I told myself, not worth getting into. I was so relieved, I almost welcomed the hollow metronome of that den clock, loudly talking the night away. One more thing happened that made me feel uneasy, though. The next morning, she called me from the airport to tell me where she'd put an envelope with my payment for the house sitting. She identified it as, she told me to look in the top drawer of the dresser in the bedroom. I checked the spare room dresser, but found nothing. It felt weird and invasive, but I checked the dresser in her personal bedroom, and the envelope was there, nestled between folded lingerie. I told myself that she probably kept her valuables there, the way that Graham kept money in her coffee tin in the freezer to hide it from burglars. But I gotta be honest, it didn't make me feel any better when I tweezed out the envelope from between bras and shoved the drawer shut. Wasn't too long after, maybe a month, before the lady had another trip taking her out of town. As it had gone so well last time, it was natural she'd ask if I was up to house sit for her again. Enough time had passed that any really strong feelings I had about it had faded. I also felt kind of guilty. Surely some of those thoughts were me being a judgmental kid, picking apart her decor and all. She was obviously a normal, if a little shy, lady. I bet knowing this random teen jerk was calling her weird in her own home would have hurt her feelings. With that in mind, I said sure. Plus, money was money, and ways to get money without taking a fry cook job were few and far between in my town. I said yes, agreeing to stay in her 90s time capsule home for the upcoming 4-day weekend. This was bracketed by an in-service day at my school, and thus no classes, and Labor Day extending the weekend into Monday. That Thursday, like clockwork, the lady called again. But unlike the first time, these calls were longer. She still rolled through normal questions, but then she just started wandering, more monologuing on her end. Her voice was different, too. It kept going higher, breathier. She giggled more. That first night, she again asked if I had tried out the other beds, then went so far as to talk about her new memory foam mattress topper. She finished this story by telling me it was permitted for me to sleep in there, on her bed, if I so chose. Call me a wuss, or say I'm overreacting. That felt off to me. Why was this woman so pressed to have a strange, non-relative teenage boy nestle up under her sheets? I said, sure, the topper sounded luxe, but no thanks. The spare room bed was fine. She giggled again, sounding a little nervous, even as she kind of cut me off from explaining why I didn't want to sleep in her bed. She spoke a bit longer about her trip, wished me a good night, and disconnected the call. I'd been pacing around, and at that point, I had ended up in the spare room. Figuring I'd hit the hay soon, I went to move my suitcase off of the guest bed and peel back the comforter. When I did, I realized that the spare room bed didn't have sheets on it. I poked around in the linen closet until I found the same sheets that had been on my bed the last time, yellow ones with little blue dots. Then I remade the bed. I remember sort of chanting things at myself like she just forgot before her trip. She probably doesn't have company often. She didn't leave my bed unmade on purpose. It's a coincidence she was so pushy about her bed. I felt weird, but I didn't want to. Not this early in the stay. Needing a distraction, I went to the kitchen to check the fridge. The last time I'd come, it had been full of condiments and all the shelves on the door, and she'd had a pack of string cheese in there. Good old string cheese, normal and bland. That's what I needed. But when I opened the refrigerator door this time, most of the condiments were gone. Ketchup, mustard, pickles, barbecue sauce, all gone. Instead, the shelves on the door were full of cans of beer and a couple bottles of wine. Okay, this was before the whole wine mom cultural zeitgeist, but she was of the age that wine seemed normal. Cans of beer, though. I glanced around the kitchen, taking in the wallpaper strips in this room. They featured geese with faded blue bonnets and little sprays of flowers. She didn't seem like the kind of lady who'd crack open a cold one with the boys, if you get my drift. That little feeling of off returned from where I'd banished it in the spare room. Again, I started trying to convince myself that I was jumping to conclusions. After all, the first time I had stayed, the lady couldn't know if I was going to get drunk and break stuff. She probably did have alcohol and just hid it at that time. And now that she knew I wasn't that guy, she didn't bother. Or, like the bed in the spare bedroom, she forgot. It's as simple as that. I reached in, located the string cheese, and took a couple. Then I closed the refrigerator door, like I was closing down further thought on the lady's attempt at a kegerator. Best attempts to convince myself otherwise aside, the whole thing had me feeling uncomfortable. It again took me a while to get to sleep that night. The next day, I sped through the chores. I watered the plants, I checked the mail, I brought in the dinky free paper some business in our town paid teens like me to litter onto people's driveways. I texted a lot with my friends. I put on some YouTube videos for noise. And in the day, the house seemed normal. All the strange feelings I had had the night before were easy to forget. But as the sun set, the unsettling feeling crept back down the phone line and sent the beige landline ringing with another strange call after dark. It was her, making her nightly check-in. It sounded like she was driving, which, good. Maybe the call would end as soon as she made it to wherever she was going. It felt like a relief that there would be a natural reason for the call to end. Until it did, though. I was treated to another meandering conversation, her telling me anecdotes, me making sounds to tell her I was listening, even if I didn't have a response. But then, as though she felt she'd lulled me into a comfort zone, came the questions. And this evening, she particularly wanted to know about school. The girls at school. Did I have any crushes, she asked. Did I have little girlfriends? And hey, how about a free little soapbox moment about how far had I gone? And was I safe when I don't want to repeat it here. You get where she went with it. Worse, the driving sound had stopped. All was still in the background noise on her end of the line. She'd gotten to where she was driving, parked, and stayed on the line. My hope at it being a quick phone call crumbled to ash. Still, her asking about what was basically my sex life was jarring enough to finally push back on her, tell her it was inappropriate. I was trying out phrasing in my head while I waited for her to pause and give me an in to respond. But before I could interject, tell her this topic made me uncomfortable, no matter how she meant to come across, she switched gears herself. Or rather, same gear, different subject. She'd had a boyfriend recently, she told me. There was the sound of a car door opening from her end of the line. It hadn't worked out with her and the boyfriend, she told me. The car door slammed. It sounded really loud. This boyfriend hadn't worked out, and neither had any of the boyfriends she'd had before. Her voice lost its little girl whisper aspect, but the conversation got really serious, taut, like a clothing line pulled super tight. Her work was hard, she told me. Her family didn't notice anything she did, she told me. Really, it was just everything at once, ganging up on her to not work out. Her voice became rhythmic. There was this metronome sound, almost keeping the cadence of how she spoke on a tempo. I found myself nodding along, unnerved by an older woman, a non-family or family friend, telling me about all of this. But it did sound rough, and I felt bad for her. Until she said, "Why, sometimes it feels like you're my only friend." And then she paused, giving me space to give her an answer I didn't have. Oh boy. Something was wrong. Really, really wrong. Not just because this lady was clearly in some bad way in her brain, which she was, but there was something else I heard in that bated pause. I remembered literally plugging the ear that wasn't pressed against the receiver to make sure I wasn't just weirding myself out, or it wasn't some strange echo. But as I did, I heard the metronome more clearly. It wasn't a metronome, it was a clock. The ostentatiously loud grandfather clock from the den. The one whose volume climbed as the sun set, like a counterweight. I heard it coming from the phone handset, and I knew. I knew then, and I know now, that I was hearing it because the handset and the woman holding it were in the house with me, and I panicked. I tried to keep my head together, but my heart was racing. I dropped the hand covering the ear not pressed against the phone. I got up and stood as still as I could. I tried to stay calm as I now heard her move past the clock, its tick-tocking getting softer on the phone. I moved from the kitchen to the back hallway, keeping distance from where I guessed she was. I knew my bag, with my keys, was back in the spare bedroom. I needed them to escape. The house was sort of built like a circle. It went front door, wall, Den to the right, office to the left. The den connected to the kitchen, then hallway, bedrooms, and bathroom. The office opened into another hallway, back to the bedrooms. As soon as I heard her feet on the kitchen linoleum, I was already down the hall, grabbing my bag. I paused, waiting to feel her feet hit carpet. Through the vibrations on the floor, I swore I felt it. Feeling like an animal being stalked in the savannah, I slid from the bedroom and back to the office. The office was the opposite side of the circle that her house made, but it had those weird barroom swinging doors in its doorway. While I tried to limbo under it to avoid the squeaky things, my forehead hit the bottom of one and made a loud creak. That's when I remembered that if I could hear her over the phone, she could hear me. I bolted for the front door as I felt her footsteps through the floor. I blurted something over the line to muffle my progress through the house. Something like I was sorry, I didn't feel well, and I was going home, but would check on the house in the morning. Just anything I could say, stammering, to cover my progress as I rushed through the front door. I barely remembered to drop the handset to her phone on the little entryway table before I pulled the door shut, locked it, and ran to my car. My mind told me she was inches behind me, even as I didn't hear the door open. It didn't matter. I could feel her hands grabbing at me from behind, up until I dropped into the driver's seat of my car and took off out of there, nearly hitting a car. Her car, parked on the street, its nose just over the line of where her driveway met the road. She wasn't there, grasping at me like some stranger danger poster. But man, I wasn't going to stick around long enough for her to be able to either, you know? When I got home, I broke down and told my mom what had happened. She was stunned, but her dark eyes glittered at the thought of what this lady had put her only kid through. She hugged me hard, then told me I had done the right thing and she'd take care of it. I don't know if words were said at work or what. My mom worked at the same place for another 7 years, so maybe not. But then again, I never got called to come house sit again. Recently, I thought to ask my mom what had happened. She told me she'd tell me when I was older, but she never has. Maybe it's for the best. Is there an age and old enough for me to reach to feel okay about it? If there is, I haven't reached it yet. To this day, sometimes I can still feel hands slipping through the air behind me when I walk to my car after dark. Memories of her continue to chase me every time I hear a loud clock. You know how when you're a kid, you get used to the sound of your own home breathing, floorboards settling, street sounds outside if you live next to a busy thoroughfare, and how, on a very deep survival level, it troubles you to sleep in a place where the breathing seems off-tempo, where the street is too quiet. That alone could give you the spooks. Who knows if the lady was actually there? Sounds like he won't. so we'll just have to guess. But that's what I had for you today. Please use the corresponding like, comment, and subscribe to your heart's content. And thank you for listening. Take care, stranger.